She was just a hotel maid, but when the billionaire realized he wanted her, she entered his life as part of the scenery, discreet, quiet, invisible. But all it took was one look for him to know. There was something about her he couldn't control. She didn't fear him, she didn't admire him, she simply saw him. And for the first time, the most powerful man in the country felt vulnerable to a woman who said nothing, but made everything inside him tremble. Sorry to break the mood, but if you love stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Help us grow this channel, and may the good vibes come back to you twofold. Thanks, and enjoy the story. The majestic Grand Hotel rose majestically in the heart of New York City, a building that blended Gilded Age architecture with modern touches. Its marble hallways and crystal chandeliers were silent witnesses to the powerful figures who passed through its doors each day. Damian Blackwood, owner of the most influential investment firm on Wall Street, crossed the lobby with his gaze locked on his phone. At 38, his chiseled face rarely showed any emotion. The custom-made Italian cashmere suit fit his athletic frame perfectly, while his Italian leather shoes echoed with authority on the marble floor. "Welcome back, Mr. Blackwood," the hotel manager greeted, bowing slightly. Damian barely glanced up from his device, responding with a curt nod. His company's stock had climbed 3 points that morning, and he was more interested in closing the acquisition of a resort portfolio in the Caribbean than in pleasantries. "Have the conference room ready for tomorrow at 8. 15 people, he ordered while signing the register, and I'm not to be disturbed until then. The Global Finance Summit would begin in 2 days, and although he was the main sponsor, Damian was only thinking about the new contracts he would sign. To him, New York City was just another stop on his schedule, another place to multiply his fortune. Outside, the grey October sky began to unleash an intense, seasonal rain. The drops hammered against the penthouse windows as Damian reviewed documents on his laptop. The panoramic view of the city was blurred behind the fogged glass, but it didn't matter to him. To him, landscapes were an unnecessary luxury. After 3 hours of video calls, he decided to head down to the restaurant. However, checking his watch, he realized he'd forgotten some important documents in his room's safe. Irritated by his own oversight, he hurried back. As he opened the door to his suite, he stopped short. He wasn't alone. "Excuse me, sir. I'm almost finished," a soft voice said. A young maid was changing the towels in the bathroom. She wore the hotel's black uniform with gold trim, and her dark hair was pulled back in a braid that fell over her shoulder. Damian frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "Housekeeping is supposed to be done when I'm not here," he said coldly. "I'm very sorry," she replied, turning to look at him directly. "There was a plumbing issue on the floor below, so we had to reshuffle the schedule." It was then that Damian truly saw her. Her eyes, the color of amber, didn't waver under his intimidating gaze. There was something in her posture, in the way she held the towel in her hands, that conveyed an uncommon dignity. "My name is Isabel Vance," she continued, finishing her placement of the toiletries. "If you need anything special during your stay, you can ask any of us directly." Damian stood motionless, watching her. She wasn't the conventional beauty who usually accompanied him to social events. Isabel had something different, a natural grace that needed no adornment. Her hands, though clearly hard-working, moved with a delicacy and precision that caught his attention. "I don't need anything," he answered automatically, but his voice had lost some of its usual harshness. Isabel quickly finished her tasks while Damian pretended to review some papers. For some inexplicable reason, he found himself watching how she carefully arranged each item in its exact place. It wasn't just efficiency, there was something almost reverent in how she handled each object. "I'm finished, Mr. Blackwood. Again, my apologies for the interruption," she said, heading for the door. "How do you know my name?" he asked, surprised. Isabel smiled slightly, and Damian noticed a small mole near the corner of her lips. "All the staff knows our VIP guests," she replied naturally. "Especially someone who could probably buy this hotel if you felt like it." There was a hint of humor in her voice without being disrespectful. Before Damian could respond, she added, "Have a good afternoon, sir." And with that, she disappeared down the hall, leaving a subtle scent of jasmine behind her. Damian stood still, a strange feeling in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him with that mix of respect and ease, without the cloying adulation he was used to. He walked to the window, watching the rain that continued to fall on the city. Fifth Avenue stretched below him, its lights beginning to glow in the early rainy evening. Cars moved slowly, their lights reflecting on the wet asphalt. "I'm tired," he told himself, rubbing his eyes. "Too many hours of work." There was no other explanation for the restlessness he felt. That night, during a dinner with important executives at the hotel restaurant, Damien found himself searching for her among the staff. He didn't see her. Conversations about mergers and acquisitions continued around him, but for the first time in years, his mind was elsewhere. While savoring the dry-aged New York strip steak the chef had prepared for the occasion, Damien wondered where in the enormous building Isabel was, what she did after her shift ended, if she had a family waiting for her. Ridiculous, he thought, cutting a piece of meat with more force than necessary. She's just another employee. But when he returned to his suite that night, he noticed something different. On the pillow, next to the traditional chocolates, was a small paper figure, a perfectly folded origami crane. There was no note, none was needed. Damien picked up the delicate figure, examining it under the lamplight. He felt a smile form on his lips, the first genuine one in a long time. Tomorrow would be another day of ruthless negotiations and corporate strategies, but for tonight, the powerful Damien Blackwood fell asleep with a paper crane on his nightstand and the image of amber-colored eyes in his memory. The Global Finance Summit had officially begun. The majestic Grand Hotel was buzzing with activity, with executives and entrepreneurs from all over the world gathered in its halls. For anyone else, it would have been the perfect time to network and close million-dollar deals. But Damien Blackwood, against all odds, was distracted. During the presentation of his new financial project, the powerful tycoon lost his train of thought when he saw Isabel enter discreetly through a side door, carrying a tray of water and glasses for the attendees. No one else seemed to notice her. To the rest of the room, she was part of the furniture, as invisible as all those who served. But to Damien, she had suddenly become the only person visible in the room. "As I was saying, the investment in tourist infrastructure in Costa Rica," he continued, forcing himself to focus on the numbers projected on the screen. When the meeting ended, Damien lingered, pretending to review documents. In reality, he was watching Isabel efficiently clean the room, collecting cups and arranging chairs. Her movements were swift, yet careful. She wasted no energy, no time. The next few days turned into a strange ritual. Damien began to memorize the housekeeping schedules, subtly adjusting his own activities to coincide with moments when Isabel would be nearby. He saw her in the hallways, pushing carts of fresh linens. He watched her from the restaurant as she arranged the centerpieces with fresh autumn floral arrangements. One Wednesday afternoon, while pretending to read the newspaper in the lobby, he saw Isabel help an elderly woman who had spilled her tea. While other employees hurried past, she stopped, cleaned up the mess, and then spoke with the woman for a few minutes. She even brought her a new tea and some cinnamon cookies. The woman's grateful smile seemed to light up Isabel's face. "Who are you, really?" Damien wondered every time he saw her interact with others. There was something disarming about the way she treated everyone with the same dignity, regardless of their social standing. On Thursday night, during a dinner with Japanese investors, Damien barely listened to the conversation. His gaze constantly drifted toward Isabel, who was supervising the service at a nearby table. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she lifted a water pitcher. She was exhausted, but she maintained her composure and her smile. "Do you agree, Mr. Blackwood?" Mr. Takahashi's voice brought him back to reality. "Of course," he replied automatically, having no idea what he was agreeing to. Later that night, while reviewing contracts in his suite, Damien heard a soft knock on the door. When he opened it, he found a young employee who wasn't Isabel. "Turn down service, sir," the girl said timidly. "Where is Miss Vance?" he asked without thinking. The young woman seemed surprised that he knew a maid's name. "Isabel finished her shift an hour ago, sir. She was covering a double today." After the employee left, Damien went to the window. The rain had returned, lighter now, like a fine curtain of water over the city. Without much thought, he grabbed his coat and went down to the lobby. "Do you know if Miss Vance has left yet?" he asked the doorman, discreetly slipping him a crisp $100 bill. "She just left, sir. She always takes the bus at the stop on Fifth Avenue." Damien stepped out onto the damp street. The cool air hit his face as he walked briskly toward the avenue. He saw her in the distance, standing under the shelter of the bus stop, wearing a worn coat and a small backpack. He stopped at a safe distance, observing her. Isabel stared into the distance with a tired expression. The light from the street lamps reflected in the puddles at her feet, creating a fragmented cityscape of lights. She took a book from her bag and began to read, oblivious to the world around her. From his position, Damien could see the title, Chronicle of a Death Foretold. A shiver ran down his spine. His late mother had adored Garcia Marquez. A bus pulled up in front of her. Isabel put her book away and got on, disappearing behind the fogged-up windows. Damien stood motionless, feeling the drizzle soak his expensive suit. For the first time in his adult life, he felt powerless. He, who could buy virtually anything, had no idea how to reach this woman who rode the bus with a used book under her arm. Back in his suite, Damien couldn't concentrate. The figures on his computer screen seemed blurry and insignificant. For the first time since building his empire, the numbers held no interest for him. He picked up his phone and called Roger, his personal assistant. "I need information on a hotel employee. Isabel Vance." "Is there a problem, sir?" Roger asked. "No, just be discreet." The next morning, during breakfast, Isabel entered the restaurant with a cleaning cart. As she passed his table, Damien noticed a bruise on her wrist that she tried to hide with the sleeve of her uniform. Their eyes met for a second. She gave him a polite smile as she would any guest, but Damien saw something else in her eyes, a deep weariness, a worry that went beyond physical exhaustion. As she moved away, Damien felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't desire he felt, though Isabel was undeniably beautiful. It was something more, something he had forgotten long ago. Empathy. He wanted to protect her, to know what that brave smile was hiding. That afternoon, while signing the acquisition of a major real estate deal in Miami, Damien made a decision. He called Roger again. "Cancel my appointments for tomorrow," he ordered. "But sir, the meeting with the Dubai investors, you handle it. There's something I need to do." After hanging up, Damien looked at the small paper crane that now rested on his desk. There was something about Isabel Vance that challenged everything he thought he knew about the world, about people, and about himself, and he was determined to find out what it was. The clock in the reception area read 6 p.m. when Damien Blackwood positioned himself strategically near the staff entrance. He was dressed more casually than usual, beige linen trousers and a blue shirt with the sleeves slightly rolled up. He wanted to appear approachable, though his rigid posture and the way he constantly checked his platinum watch betrayed his discomfort. The New York City sky was painted in shades of orange and purple as the evening shift employees began to leave. Damien recognized some he had seen serving in the restaurant or cleaning the hallways, but his eyes searched only for Isabel. Roger had provided him with basic information. Isabel Vance, 27, 5 years working at the Majestic Grand, lived in a small apartment in Queens with her sick father. Incomplete university studies in literature at NYU due to financial problems. No criminal record. Precarious financial situation. Cold facts that didn't explain what he really wanted to know, why he couldn't stop thinking about her. Finally, he saw her. Isabel was leaving with another maid, laughing at something her colleague had said. Her hair was down, falling in waves over her shoulders, so different from the neat braid she wore at work. Her clothes were simple but clean. Jeans, a white blouse embroidered with colorful flowers, and a light sweater in her hand. "Miss Vance," Damien called, approaching with the confidence of someone accustomed to the world bending to his will. Isabel stopped, visibly surprised. Her colleague glanced at her curiously, but with a discreet gesture, Isabel signaled for her to go on ahead. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, immediately adopting the professional posture she used in the hotel. "Do you need something? My shift is over, but I can call guest services if—" "No, it's not that," he interrupted, offering a calculated smile. "I'd like to speak with you for a few minutes. Will you join me for a coffee?" Isabel seemed uncomfortable, glancing toward the exit where her friend waited at a distance. "I'm sorry, sir, but I have to catch my train. My father is waiting for me at home." "I can have my driver take you home afterward," Damien insisted. "It's important." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because after a few seconds of hesitation, Isabel gave a short nod. She waved to her friend, indicating she could leave without her. They walked to a small coffee shop a block from the hotel. It wasn't the kind of establishment Damien would normally frequent, but he knew Isabel would feel more comfortable there than in the hotel's 5-star restaurant. "What can I get for you, hun?" The waitress, an older woman with a kind smile, asked. "An Americano black," Damien replied. "Just a black coffee for me, please, Maria," Isabel added. "Coming right up, sweetie," the woman replied, winking at her before walking away. "You come here often," Damien observed. It wasn't a question. Every day before my shift, she confirmed. They make the best coffee in Midtown. An awkward silence settled between them. Isabel nervously fiddled with a napkin, waiting for him to speak. Miss Vance, I'll get straight to the point, Damien began, leaning slightly across the table. I've noticed your work at the hotel, your dedication, your attention to detail. Those are rare qualities these days. Isabel watched him cautiously but said nothing. I have a proposition for you, he continued. I'm looking for a personal assistant, someone to manage my townhouse on the Upper East Side, accompany me on business trips, coordinate my personal schedule. The salary would, of course, be considerably better than your current one. The waitress returned with their drinks. Isabel took a sip of her coffee as if needing time to process what she had just heard. And why me? She finally asked. You must know hundreds of people who are better qualified with experience in that kind of work. Damien looked at her directly. For a moment he was tempted to tell her the truth, because he couldn't stop thinking about her, because he wanted to know her better, because something in her dignity had captivated him. But those were not words the powerful Damien Blackwood would ever say. I trust my business instincts, he replied instead, and my instinct tells me you are the right person. You would start immediately. I'm traveling to Chicago this weekend, and you could accompany me to familiarize yourself with my routines. Isabel set her cup down on the table with more force than necessary. Her eyes, usually warm, had hardened. Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate your offer, but I must decline, she said in a firm voice. Damien blinked, confused. He hadn't even considered the possibility of rejection. The salary would be 3 times what you make now, he pressed. And you could help with your father's medical expenses. Isabel's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with clear annoyance. Have you been investigating me? She asked, her voice barely controlling her indignation. I just wanted to know who I would be working with, he defended. Isabel stood up, grabbing her purse and sweater. I've known enough men like you, Mr. Blackwood, she said, and her voice had an edge he hadn't heard before. Men who think everything has a price, who think they can buy people like they buy properties or stocks. You're misinterpreting my intentions, Damien protested, also getting to his feet. Am I? Isabel stared at him. Are you telling me you wouldn't expect other services besides professional ones, that you don't think that because my financial situation is difficult, I'd be willing to do anything? Damien felt as if he'd been doused in cold water. Never in his adult life had anyone spoken to him like that. I didn't. He started, but the words wouldn't come. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Blackwood. Have a good evening. Isabel walked away with her head held high, leaving Damien standing by the table with his untouched coffee and an expression of total bewilderment. Maria came over, wiping the table. That girl's got more dignity in her little finger than most folks with fat wallets, she commented casually. That's why we all love her around here. Damien left a large bill on the table and walked out onto the street. The cool evening air failed to clear his mind. He looked for Isabel, but she had already disappeared into the crowd filling Fifth Avenue at that hour. On the way back to the hotel, a mix of emotions washed over him. He was furious at the rejection, indignant at the accusations, and strangely, more fascinated than ever. Because Isabel Vance had just done something no one had done in over a decade. She had said no to Damien Blackwood, and instead of forgetting her, as logic dictated, he now wanted her even more. Isabel's rejection continued to burn in Damien's mind like an ember that refused to die out. Sitting in his temporary office at the majestic Grand, he stared blankly at the contracts on his desk. 3 days had passed since that conversation in the coffee shop, and he hadn't been able to focus on the business that had brought him to New York. Roger, I need more information on Isabel Vance, he ordered his assistant over the phone. Everything. Her family situation, financial problems, personal relationships. I want a full report on my desk by morning. Sir, with all due respect, don't you think you're going too far for a simple maid? Roger dared to question. Just do what I asked, Damien snapped, ending the call abruptly. He went to the minibar and poured himself a single malt scotch, watching the city lights through the window. The image of Isabel telling him he was just like all the other men who thought they could buy anything tormented him. Have I really become that? He wondered, a doubt he never would have had before meeting her. The next morning, Roger handed him a manila folder. The report was more comprehensive than he'd expected. Isabel Guadalupe Vance, 27, only child of Fernando Vance, a retired literature professor suffering from a degenerative disease that left him unable to walk. Her mother had died of cancer 5 years ago, leaving them with significant medical debt and a mortgage on their small house in Queens. Isabel had dropped out of her literature program at NYU to support her father. She worked double shifts at the hotel and, on weekends, sold handmade crafts at an artisan market in Brooklyn. But what struck Damien the most was the information about her ex-boyfriend, Eddie the Ghost Jimenez, 33, with multiple arrests for domestic violence and drug dealing. He had been harassing Isabel since their breakup 6 months ago, with several police reports filed that had resulted in no concrete action. The last page contained a recent photo, Isabel with a visible bruise on her cheekbone, leaving a police station. The report indicated that the ghost had cornered her near her home the previous week, threatening her and demanding money. Damien closed the folder, feeling a mix of rage and guilt. His offer now seemed so arrogant, so insensitive. It was no wonder she had reacted the way she did. "Roger," he called to his assistant, who was waiting silently, "get our law firm in New York on the line, and the Blackwood Foundation. I have several urgent projects." For the next few days, Damien worked in silence. He made no attempt to approach Isabel, who continued her usual duties at the hotel, carefully avoiding any contact with him. The first miracle happened a week later. Isabel received a letter notifying her that an anonymous benefactor had paid off her home mortgage in full. Her first reaction was disbelief, then suspicion. The bank assured her that everything was legal and the debt was completely settled. That same afternoon, returning from work, she found her father smiling in a way she hadn't seen in months. "Isabel," Fernando exclaimed from his wheelchair, "you're not going to believe what happened. A doctor came by, says he's part of a new program for patients with my condition. It's all covered by a private foundation." Isabel sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "What foundation, Dad?" "The Blackwood Foundation. The doctor mentioned its president personally insisted I be included in the program. Isn't that a blessing?" Isabel's heart skipped a beat when she heard that name. It couldn't be a coincidence. The next day, as she was leaving the hotel to catch the train, the head of security stopped her. "Miss Vance, there's a car waiting for you." At the curb was a new silver Honda Civic. It wasn't flashy, but it wasn't the kind of vehicle someone with her salary could afford. "There must be a mistake," she protested. "No mistake, miss," the guard said, handing her an envelope. "The keys and title are in your name. Someone paid for the vehicle in full." That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. Sitting in the small living room of her house with the car title, the bank letter, and the medical program brochure spread on the table, she tried to make sense of what was happening, and then she saw it. The logo on the Blackwood Foundation's materials was the same design as the letterhead she had seen Damien use at the hotel. It was no coincidence. "I'm going to talk to him tomorrow," she murmured, a mix of indignation and confusion welling inside her. The next morning, Isabel showed up at the hotel reception wearing jeans and a simple blouse. It wasn't her day to work. "I need to see Mr. Blackwood," she said with determination. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood is in an important meeting," the receptionist replied. "Do you have an appointment? Tell him Isabel Vance needs to speak with him. Urgently." The receptionist seemed hesitant, but finally made the call. To Isabel's surprise, she was instructed to escort her immediately to the private lounge in the penthouse. Damien was waiting for her, standing by the window with a coffee cup in his hand. He wore a dark grey suit that contrasted with the colourful view of the city stretching out behind him. "Miss Vance, what a surprise," he said in a neutral tone, though his eyes revealed a certain tension. "How can I help you?" Isabel walked forward until she was just a few feet from him. For a moment the words caught in her throat. She had mentally rehearsed this encounter, but now she didn't know where to begin. "My mortgage has been paid," she said finally. "My father is receiving treatment from specialists, and there's a new car with my name on the title." Damien didn't respond, merely taking a sip of his coffee. "It was you, wasn't it?" she continued. "Why did you do it? What do you want from me?" "Please, sit," he offered, gesturing to one of the leather armchairs. "I'd rather stand. Answer my question." Damien set down his cup and approached her. There was something different in his gaze, a vulnerability Isabel hadn't seen before. "I don't want anything from you, Isabel," he said quietly. "I just wanted to help." "Why?" she insisted. "Why me? And how did you know about the mortgage? About my father? About Eddie Jimenez?" He finished for her. "Yes, I'm aware of your situation. And I want you to know that steps have been taken to ensure that man will never bother you again." Isabel turned pale. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Nothing illegal, I assure you. My lawyers simply filed a formal complaint backed by concrete evidence. Mr. Jimenez is now facing serious charges that will keep him away for a very long time." Isabel sank into the armchair, overwhelmed. The tears she had held back for months threatened to spill over. "I don't understand," she murmured. "Why would you do all this for me? You barely know me." Damien sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Because you made me see something I had forgotten, Isabel. That there are things money can't buy, and people who are worth more than any fortune. I'm not a charity case, Mr. Blackwood." Isabel's words echoed in the private lounge. She had regained her composure and now rose from the chair, her back straight and her fists clenched. "I never said you were," Damien replied, also standing. "Then what is this?" Isabel gestured around them. "Paying my mortgage? A new car? Medical treatment for my father? Do you think you can just swoop in and fix my life with your money?" Damien ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that was unlike him. "Have dinner with me tonight," he said suddenly. "At the hotel restaurant. We'll talk properly." Isabel looked at him suspiciously. "I'm not dressed for your five-star restaurant." "You look perfect," he replied, with a sincerity that disarmed her. "I'll expect you at 8. Tired to the Summit, the restaurant on the top floor of the majestic Grand, was known as one of the most exclusive in the city. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of an illuminated Fifth Avenue, with Central Park stretching into the distance. Isabel arrived promptly, wearing the same jeans and blouse from that morning. She felt out of place among the elegantly dressed diners, but she lifted her chin and walked to the table where Damien was waiting. He stood when he saw her. He was also dressed casually, dark trousers and a grey cashmere sweater. For the first time, Isabel noticed how handsome he was when he wasn't projecting that aura of arrogance. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out her chair. A waiter approached with 2 glasses of red wine. "I don't drink alcohol," Isabel said. "I'd prefer water, please." The waiter glanced at Damien, who nodded. "Of course. Then I won't drink either," he said, pushing his own glass aside. "You don't have to change your habits for me," she replied, slightly irritated. "I'm not doing it out of obligation." An uncomfortable silence settled between them as their first course was served, a cream of butternut squash soup. "You haven't answered my question," Isabel finally said. "Why are you doing all of this?" Damien put down his spoon and met her eyes. "Because of how you spoke to me that afternoon in the coffee shop," he admitted. "No one has told me such blunt truths in years. You made me question who I've become, and you decided to redeem yourself through me," she asked skeptically. "It's not that simple." Damien looked out at the city lights. "When I found out about your situation, your father, that man who was harassing you, I felt I had to do something, that I could use my resources for something more than just making more money. You could have donated to a charity," she countered, "helped hundreds of people instead of focusing on one." "I do, actually. The Blackwood Foundation supports numerous social programs." Isabel blushed slightly, ashamed of her assumption. "What I'm trying to say," she continued in a softer voice, "is that I don't want to be a charity case. I don't want to feel bought." "Isabel," he said, using her first name for the first time, "the last thing I want is for you to feel that way. I just wanted to help, with no strings attached." The sincerity in his voice left Isabel feeling confused. This was not the arrogant man she had met days ago. "My father is very grateful," she admitted finally. "He says it's a miracle." A faint smile touched Damien's lips. "I'd like to meet him someday. My mother loved literature like him." The waiter cleared their plates and served the main course, pan-seared scallops with saffron risotto. The conversation flowed more easily as they ate, talking about books, music, and favorite places in the city. "How did you go from studying literature to running a business empire?" Isabel asked, genuinely curious. "Life takes unexpected turns," he replied, his face briefly darkening. "My father died when I was 20. I had to drop out of my philosophy program to take over the family business. It was that or watch it fall apart." "I'm sorry," she said, surprised by the revelation. "Over time, I discovered I had a talent for business, but something was lost along the way." His voice trailed off, as if he were talking more to himself than to her. As dinner ended, a different kind of silence settled between them. It was no longer awkward, but charged with something unsaid, with possibilities. "I should go," Isabel said, checking her watch. "My father will be waiting." Damien nodded, signaling the waiter for the check. "I'll walk you to your car." They walked together to the parking garage, where the silver Honda Civic waited. Under the dim light, their shadows stretched long on the pavement. "Thank you for dinner," she said, fumbling for her keys in her purse. "And thank you for everything else, even though I still think it's too much." "Isabel," Damien's voice was barely a whisper. She looked up and met his eyes, which were intense and vulnerable, in a way she'd never seen. "I can't get you out of my head," he confessed, his voice intimate. "Ever since I saw you in my room that afternoon, you've been on my mind. Constantly." A shiver ran down Isabel's spine. Her heart hammered against her ribs, betraying her. "This can't happen," she managed to say, though her voice trembled. "We're from completely different worlds. You'll go back to your life of luxury and travel, and I—" "What if it doesn't have to be that way?" he interrupted, taking a step closer. They were so close now that Isabel could smell his cologne, a subtle blend of wood and spice. For a fleeting moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to let go, to allow herself to feel something for this man who had turned her life upside down in a matter of days. But the fear was stronger. "I have to go," she said abruptly, pulling open the car door with trembling hands. "Thanks again for dinner." Before Damien could reply, she was inside the car, the engine roaring to life. The last thing she saw in her rearview mirror was his figure, standing motionless in the garage, watching her drive away. As she drove down Fifth Avenue, silent tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't understand why she was crying. Was it fear, confusion, or maybe deep down, a feeling that she had just run away from the possibility of something real? Damien remained in the garage for several minutes after the car had disappeared. Finally, he returned to the now nearly empty restaurant. He sat at the bar and ordered a whiskey he had no intention of drinking. The ambient light reflected in the amber liquid, reminding him of the color of Isabel's eyes. He had never felt like this. Vulnerable, unsure, human. For the first time in his life, Damien Blackwood wanted something that all his money couldn't seem to buy. The heart of a woman who saw right through his defenses. The Global Finance Summit was still in full swing. The majestic Grand Hotel buzzed with the activity of entrepreneurs, politicians, and journalists coming and going through its halls. To most guests, the hotel staff was invisible, figures who appeared and disappeared to keep everything running perfectly. But for Damien Blackwood, only one person existed in that entire massive building. 3 days had passed since their dinner, and he hadn't spoken to Isabel again. He had seen her, of course. He had subtly adjusted his schedule to coincide with hers, creating encounters that seemed casual. In the fourth-floor hallway, as she changed the flowers in the vases. In the lobby, as he pretended to read the paper. In the conference room when she came in to serve water to the assembled executives. Their gazes would meet briefly, charged with unspoken words, before they both returned to their respective roles. He, the powerful billionaire. She, the discreet maid. For Isabel, these days had been a constant raging battle within herself. It was a war fought in the quiet moments, while polishing a silver tray, folding a fresh towel, or staring out at the city from a guest's window. She was a general commanding a single mutinous soldier, her own heart. "Stay away from him," she would order herself, her voice of reason crisp and authoritative. "Nothing good can come of this. You live on different planets, not just in different zip codes." And yet, the moment she heard the confident, rhythmic echo of his Italian leather shoes in the hallway, or caught his scent, a subtle, clean mix of wood and spice that seemed to linger in the air long after he was gone, her resolve would crumble. Her eyes would betray her, scanning the room, the lobby, the restaurant, searching for a glimpse of Damien Blackwood. It was a maddening, exhausting cycle of self-denial and involuntary longing. One Tuesday morning, the war took a decisive turn. She was assigned to the presidential suite, Damien's temporary kingdom, a sprawling space of muted greys, rich mahogany, and floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed to hold all of Manhattan captive. She moved through the rooms with her usual efficiency, but her mind was anything but calm. As she smoothed the duvet on the king-sized bed, her gaze fell upon the nightstand. Lying there, where a stack of financial reports had been the day before, was a book. It wasn't just any book. It was a collector's edition of 100 Years of Solitude, bound in dark green leather with gold-embossed lettering. Her breath caught in her throat. Tucked just inside the cover was a small, cream-colored note card, the kind the hotel provided for its most distinguished guests. The handwriting was bold and decisive, a series of sharp, intelligent angles that she somehow knew was his. to remind you that literature is still waiting for you. DB. Isabel sank onto the edge of the bed, her cleaning duties forgotten. She picked up the book, the leather cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. She traced the title, a story she had dissected in a dusty NYU classroom in what felt like another lifetime. He remembered. From their one brief dinner conversation, amidst talk of multi-billion-dollar deals and global finance, he had plucked that one small detail, her abandoned dream, and held on to it. It was the most intimate, most thoughtful gesture anyone had ever made for her. A lump formed in her throat, a tight knot of gratitude, and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. She carefully placed the book back on the nightstand, exactly as she had found it. But a small, genuine smile bloomed on her face, a fragile flower in the battlefield of her heart. Later that afternoon, Damien sat at the head of a massive mahogany table in the Vanderbilt suite. The air was thick with tension and the polite, sterile language of international business. He was flanked by his team of lawyers and analysts, facing a delegation of serious-faced Korean investors. A translator spoke in a low, continuous murmur, turning complex financial jargon from English to Korean and back again. Projections and market analyses glowed on a large screen at the end of the room. This was his world, the arena where he was an undisputed titan, but his focus was fractured. Through the suite's large glass doors, he could see the main hallway, and in the hallway he could see Isabel. She was with an elderly guest, a frail-looking man who shuffled along with the aid of a walker. Damien watched as she offered the man her arm, not with the detached professionalism of an employee, but with a genuine, gentle warmth. She slowed her own energetic pace to match his painstaking one, leaning in to listen intently as he spoke, his face animated with some story from his past. And then she smiled. It was a smile that lit up her entire face, a radiant, unguarded expression of pure kindness. Damien felt something shift inside him, a warm, unfamiliar sensation spreading through his chest. It was a feeling so foreign, he couldn't immediately name it. It wasn't desire, not in the predatory way he understood it. It was something quieter, deeper. It was admiration. It was tenderness. "Mr. Blackwood?" The translator's voice sliced through his reverie, sharp and insistent. "Mr. Park is awaiting your response regarding the revised EBITDA projections." The entire room was staring at him. Damien blinked, forcing the image of Isabel's smile from his mind and pulling the mask of the ruthless CEO back into place. "My apologies," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that masked his momentary lapse. "Could you please repeat the question?" That evening, Isabel arrived home in Queens later than usual. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant city traffic. She found her father in their small, cozy living room, bathed in the warm glow of a reading lamp. Books were stacked on every available surface, a testament to his lifelong passion. "I saw you on the news tonight, honey," Fernando said, looking up from his book with a twinkle in his eye. "Well, I saw your hotel anyway. That global finance summit seems like a very big deal." "It is," she replied, sinking onto the worn sofa beside him, the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones. "Feels like the whole world is staying there." "Including your mystery billionaire?" her father asked, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. Isabel had told him about Damien and his grand gestures, the mortgage, the car, the medical treatments, though she had carefully omitted the more confusing details, the ones that made her heart race and her palms sweat. "He's not my billionaire, Dad," she protested, but she couldn't stop the blush that crept up her neck. "And yes, he's there, buried in meetings from dawn till dusk. But he still finds time to watch you in the hallways," Fernando observed, his gaze knowing, "and to send you beautiful first editions of Garcia Marquez." Isabel fell silent, busying herself with straightening a cushion. Her father knew her too well. There was no hiding the truth from his perceptive eyes. "The doctor called today," Fernando said, wisely changing the subject. "He says the new treatment is working even better than expected. I can feel it, Izzy. The strength is coming back." "I'm so glad, Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she took his hand. It felt stronger, less fragile than it had in years. All of this. Fernando made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the paid-for house, the bottles of advanced medication on the coffee table, the new, reliable car parked outside. "We owe it to him, don't we?" "Yes," Isabel admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Her father squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes, sweetheart, Pride is a luxury we can't afford, and sometimes the things that seem most impossible are just waiting for us to be brave enough to take a chance. Long after her father had gone to bed, Isabel sat in the quiet living room, his words echoing in her mind. Brave enough to take a chance. For years, her life had been about playing it safe, about survival. She had built walls around her heart to protect it from a world that had taken too much. Damien Blackwood wasn't just a man. He was a wrecking ball, threatening to demolish every defense she had so carefully constructed. The fear was immense, but for the first time she wondered if the biggest risk wasn't letting him in, but letting him go. The next day, she made a decision. After her morning shift, her hands still smelling faintly of lavender-scented cleaning supplies, she found a piece of hotel stationery. With a slightly trembling hand, she wrote a short, simple note. She folded it crisply and, on her way out, slipped it under the door of the presidential suite. Hours later, Damien returned to his room to change before a black-tie gala. He was mentally exhausted, his mind a tangled mess of currency fluctuations and geopolitical risks. As he unbuttoned his shirt, he noticed the small cream-colored envelope on the marble floor. He bent down and opened it. Coffee tastes better when it's shared. Maria's, 7 p.m. Suddenly, a dinner with the Secretary of the Treasury and a dozen of the world's most powerful CEOs seemed utterly, painfully insignificant. He arrived at Maria's coffee shop 10 minutes early, a knot of nervous anticipation tightening in his stomach, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a teenager. He had forgone his usual suit, opting instead for dark jeans and a simple cashmere sweater, a futile attempt to blend in with the regulars of the modest cafe. Maria, the owner, recognized him instantly. "She's not here yet, hun," she said, with a knowing wink, wiping down the counter. "Grab that corner table. She'll be along." Isabel appeared at precisely 7 o'clock, a vision that made the air leave his lungs. She wore a simple floral dress, and her dark hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Freed from the severe braid and the starched uniform of the hotel, she looked younger, more relaxed. She looked like herself. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, her voice a little breathless as she slid into the booth across from him. "I cancelled dinner with the Secretary of the Treasury," Damien confessed, a wry smile touching his lips. "I think my assistant, Roger, is on the verge of a full-blown aneurysm." They both laughed. And just like that, the formidable tension that had been crackling between them for days seemed to dissipate, replaced by a warm, easy intimacy. "The book," she began, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Your note," he said at the same time. They laughed again, more freely this time. "Thank you for the book," Isabel said, her amber eyes sincere. "Garcia Marquez is one of my favorite authors." "I know," he replied softly. "You mentioned it at dinner." The fact that he remembered such a small detail, a single thread in a tapestry of complex conversations, moved her more than she could say. "Did you used to read?" she asked, her curiosity overriding her shyness. "Before you became, well, who you are now?" "I devoured books," he admitted, a nostalgic look in his eyes. "Philosophy mostly. Plato, Kant, Nietzsche. I wanted to be a professor, spend my life debating the nature of existence." "That explains a lot," she commented with a playful smile. Maria brought them 2 steaming mugs of black coffee and a small basket filled with warm cinnamon rolls, their sweet scent filling the air. For the next 2 hours they talked. They talked about everything and nothing. They talked about the books that shaped their childhoods, the music that could make them cry, the movies they could watch 100 times. For the first time, they didn't speak of money, or the hotel, or the bizarre circumstances that had thrown them together. They just spoke as a man and a woman, 2 souls discovering a surprising and profound connection. When they finally stepped back out onto the street, the night was clear and cool. The city hummed around them, a vibrant, living entity. They walked slowly along the sidewalk, a comfortable silence settling between them, neither wanting the moment to end. "My father wants to meet you," Isabel said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "He wants to thank you in person." Damien's heart leaped. "I'd love to meet him," he answered, his voice genuine. "How about tomorrow?" Isabel nodded, but he saw a shadow of doubt flicker across her face. "What is it?" he asked gently, stopping under a glowing streetlight. "It's just—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "All of this is temporary, isn't it? The summit ends in a few days. You'll go back to your real life, to your world." Damien turned to face her, his hands finding hers in the cool night air. He looked directly into her eyes, willing her to see the truth in his. "What if I could stay a little longer?" he asked softly. "I have a penthouse here in the city I barely use. I could work from New York for a while." Her heart stuttered, a wild bird trapped in her chest. But the fear, that old familiar companion, was still there, its roots sunk deep. "And then what?" she pressed, her voice trembling slightly. "This isn't a fairy tale, Damien. We're real people with completely different lives. The only thing I know for sure," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand, "is that when I'm with you, I feel more real, more alive than I have in the last 10 years. The rest, we can figure that out together." Isabel looked down at their intertwined hands. Something was shifting between them, slowly but inexorably, like a glacier carving into the sea. The war in her heart was still raging, but for the first time, she was willing to listen to the whisper of surrender, the voice that was telling her to risk it all. The Global Finance Summit was winding down. The grand corridors of the majestic Grand, which had thrummed with the energy of 1,000 deals and 1,000,000 handshakes, were now growing quiet. The executives in their sharp suits were checking out, heading back to their respective countries with signed contracts and new alliances. For Isabel, each departing guest was like the tick of a clock, counting down to the moment she had been dreading, Damien's departure. His visit to her home had been surprisingly, wonderfully normal. Her father, Fernando, and Damien had connected instantly, falling into a passionate 2-hour debate about the merits of contemporary American authors versus the Latin American masters. After Damien had left, her father, always perceptive, had taken her hand and whispered, "That man doesn't look at you like a rich man looks at a maid, Izzy. He looks at you like a man who has just found his soul." Now, on her last shift before the weekend, Isabel was mechanically stocking a linen cart, her movements automatic while her mind was 1,000,000 miles away. "Earth to Isabel," teased Carla, her co-worker, snapping her fingers in front of her face. "Still off in billionaire land?" "He's not my billionaire," Isabel protested, though the words lacked any conviction. "Well, he should be," Carla replied with a grin. "Speaking of, he left this for you at the front desk." She handed Isabel a simple, elegant envelope with her name written on it in that same distinctive script. Isabel's heart did a little flip. She quickly tucked it into her pocket. Later, on her break, she found a quiet corner in the staff lounge and opened it. The note was brief. "Penthouse Terrace, 9 p.m. The city view deserves one last look." The word "last" felt like a physical blow, squeezing the air from her lungs. She knew this day was coming, had tried to prepare herself for it, but the reality of it was a sharp, cold pain. At 8:30, her shift finally over, Isabel took the staff elevator to the top floor. She had been on the penthouse terrace countless times to clean, but never at this hour when the city was transforming, shedding its daytime skin to reveal a glittering electric soul. The night air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of autumn from Central Park. The terrace was empty except for a small table set for two. On it sat a bottle of what looked like very expensive bourbon, 2 crystal glasses, and a small bowl of spiced nuts. "It's a Pappy Van Winkle," Damien's voice said from behind her. "They say it's one of the best bourbons in the world." He emerged from the shadows, dressed in dark trousers and a soft, lightweight sweater. He looked different up here, away from the boardrooms and the weight of his empire. He looked relaxed, approachable, vulnerable. "I'm not much of a drinker," Isabel confessed with a shy smile. "Then we can just admire the bottle," he replied, moving to stand beside her at the railing. New York City sprawled before them, a breathtaking tapestry of light and shadow. The Empire State Building glowed in the distance, a majestic sentinel, while rivers of headlights flowed along the avenues below. "It's beautiful," Isabel whispered, awestruck. "Yes, it is," Damien agreed, but he was looking at her, not the landscape. A comfortable silence settled between them. It was astonishing how quickly they had learned to simply be together without the need for a constant stream of words to fill the space. "What time do you leave tomorrow?" she finally asked, the question she'd been dreading. "My flight to Tokyo is at 10 a.m., he answered, his voice strangely subdued. "A long trip. Too long." Silence again. There was so much to say, an entire universe of unspoken emotions hanging in the air between them, yet words felt clumsy and inadequate. Damien poured a small amount of the amber liquid into each glass. "To unexpected views," he said, raising his. "To chance encounters," she replied, picking up hers. The bourbon was smooth and warm, with a complex, smoky flavor that settled deep in her chest. I never asked you what your dreams are, Damien said, leaning against the railing. Not the ones you left behind, but the ones that still drive you. Isabel looked toward the horizon, where the city lights faded into the dark expanse of the night sky. To finish my degree someday, she said after a moment. Maybe try to write. And I want to see the desert. The American West, the Sonoran Desert. I've never been out of the city. Damien listened intently, his gaze fixed on her, making her feel as if she were the only person in the world. What about you? She asked. What does someone who already has everything dream of? Freedom, he answered without hesitation. Ironic, isn't it? I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but most days I feel like a prisoner of my own success. There's always one more meeting, one more contract, one more merger that can't wait. Isabel understood then that wealth and poverty could create different kinds of cages, but they were cages nonetheless. I'm scared, she confessed, her voice a near whisper. Of what? He asked, moving a little closer. Of regretting, of making the wrong choice, whatever it might be. Damien gently took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, as if they were made to fit together. I could stay, he whispered, the words escaping him almost without permission. Ask me to stay, he pleaded silently. Just say the word, and I will cancel everything. Isabel's heart pounded against her ribs. What if she did? What if she let herself believe in this impossible thing that had bloomed between them? Ask me to wait for you, she wanted to scream. Tell me this isn't the end. You have commitments, she said instead, hating the sound of her own sensible words. Responsibilities? Yes, he replied, his voice barely audible. I do. They stood like that, hands entwined, the important words trapped in their throats, while the city glittered beneath them. They talked for hours, until the sky began to soften in the east, the blackness turning to a deep, bruised purple. It was a conversation that meandered through books they both loved, movies he hadn't had time to see, and places she dreamed of visiting. When the first hint of dawn appeared, they knew it was time. I should go, she said, though every cell in her body screamed for her to stay. You have to get ready for your flight. I'll walk you down, he offered. The elevator ride was a silent descent, their hands still clasped together, a desperate final connection. In the lobby, deserted at this early hour, they faced each other for what they both knew would be the last time. Thank you, he said, his voice raw, for showing me there are still things that don't have a price. Thank you, she answered, her own voice choked with unshed tears, for reminding me that sometimes dreams knock on your door when you least expect it. He wanted to kiss her. She wanted to be kissed, but they both knew a kiss would only shatter them, making the goodbye unbearable. Goodbye, Isabel Vance, he said finally, his fingers reluctantly letting go of hers. Goodbye, Damien Blackwood, she replied, taking a step back. As the sun fully crested the horizon, Isabel watched from a second-floor window as Damien's black car pulled away from the hotel. A hollow ache bloomed in her chest, a dull, relentless pain she hadn't anticipated. It's for the best, she told herself firmly. He belonged to a world that could never be hers. What they had shared was beautiful precisely because it was fleeting, a dream from which she now had to wake up. And yet, as she watched the car disappear into the morning traffic, she couldn't escape the terrifying question, had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? 5 days had passed since Damien's departure, 5 days in which Isabel had tried to force her life back into its old familiar shape. The work at the hotel, caring for her father, the daily rhythm of a life defined by duty. But a vital piece of her was missing. A sense of loss followed her everywhere, a silent grey shadow. That Wednesday, Isabel left the hotel later than usual. A guest had spilled a bottle of red wine on an expensive Persian rug, and she had stayed after her shift to help the specialized cleaning crew. What she didn't notice was the pair of eyes watching her from a beat-up car parked across the street. Eddie the Ghost Jimenez had been watching her for days. His bloodshot eyes, fueled by cheap whiskey and a festering rage, tracked her new silver Honda Civic as it pulled into traffic. So you're playing the rich girl now, huh, Izzy? He muttered to himself, taking a swig from a bottle nestled between his legs. We'll see how long that lasts. Ever since he'd been released on bail, his high-priced lawyer finding a loophole, Eddie had been obsessed. His twisted mind had churned her rejection, her success, and his own humiliation into a toxic, dangerous cocktail. Seeing her in that new car, Hearing the whispers from his street contacts about some billionaire who had taken an interest in her had pushed his obsession to a boiling point. That night, in the small house in Queens, Isabel and Fernando were having a quiet dinner. An old game show, one of her father's favorites, played on the TV. "I got an interesting call today," Fernando commented as Isabel refilled his water glass. "From an editor at Penguin Random House. They want me to review a manuscript on contemporary American poetry." "Dad, that's wonderful," Isabel exclaimed, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "Are you going to do it?" "Already accepted," he said with a proud grin. "The treatment is working, sweetheart. I feel like myself again." She hugged him tightly, a wave of pure joy washing over her. For so long his illness had defined them. To see him reclaiming his life, his passion, was a gift beyond measure. "You should call him," Fernando said suddenly, his tone casual. "Call who?" she asked, though she knew perfectly well who he meant. "Damien. I know you miss him." Isabel sighed, gathering their plates. "It's better this way, Dad. We're from different worlds. Besides, he must be busy in... Where did he say he was going? Tokyo?" "The heart doesn't care about geography, sweetie," Fernando replied gently. "Or tax brackets." Before Isabel could answer, a deafening crash made them both jump. The front door flew open, slamming against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Eddie stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, his handsome face twisted into a mask of drunken rage. In his right hand, he held a broken beer bottle, its jagged edges catching the light. "Well, well, the happy family," he slurred. "You miss me, Izzy?" Isabel froze, her blood turning to ice. Her father, with a surge of protective instinct, tried to push his wheelchair forward, to place himself between her and Eddie. "Get out of my house, Eduardo," Fernando commanded, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "I've already called the police." Eddie let out a harsh, ugly laugh. "Don't lie to me, old man," he snarled, stalking toward them. "Nobody's coming to save you." With a vicious shove, he sent Fernando's wheelchair toppling over. Her father cried out as he hit the floor hard. A scream tore from Isabel's throat, and she launched herself at Eddie, beating at his chest with her fists. "Leave him alone, he's a sick man," she cried, her voice choked with terror and rage. Eddie grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back as he dragged her into the living room. "I heard all about you and your rich boyfriend," he hissed, his face inches from hers, his breath sour with cheap liquor. "You think you can just dump me for some suit? You think you're too good for me now?" "Eddie, please," Isabel begged, tears streaming down her face as she struggled against his iron grip. "Don't do this. You're gonna pay for humiliating me," he screamed, raising the broken bottle. Isabel shut her eyes, bracing for the impact, but it never came. Instead, she heard a sickening thud, and the crushing pressure on her scalp was suddenly gone. Her eyes flew open to a sight her mind could barely comprehend. Damien Blackwood was there. He had Eddie's wrist in a grip of pure steel, his knuckles white with the strain. His normally composed face was transformed, carved into a mask of cold, calculated fury. "Let her go," Damien ordered, his voice as sharp and dangerous as the broken glass. Eddie's shock lasted only a second before he roared and lunged at Damien with the bottle. Damien moved with a fluid grace that was shockingly lethal, sidestepping the clumsy attack and delivering a hard, precise punch to Eddie's jaw. The thug stumbled back, but came charging again, a wild animal running on pure adrenaline. The two men crashed into the coffee table, which splintered under their weight. Isabel scrambled to her father, helping him back into his chair. From there, they watched in horror as the brutal fight unfolded. Damien, despite his elegant suit, moved with the disciplined precision of a trained fighter, blocking Eddie's wild swings and countering with swift, punishing blows. "Dad, call 911, Isabel whispered, shoving the phone into his shaking hands. The fight raged through the small living room, a whirlwind of overturned furniture, shattered glass, and the guttural sounds of combat. Finally, Damien landed a clean, powerful strike to Eddie's temple. Eddie staggered backward, his eyes rolling up in his head, before collapsing in a heap on the ruined table. In the sudden, ringing silence, the only sound was the ragged gasps of Damien's breathing. He crossed the ruined room to Isabel and her father, a cut bleeding freely from his eyebrow, his expensive suit torn and stained. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice instantly softening as his gaze fell on Isabel. She could only nod, her body trembling with shock. Fernando reached out and grasped Damien's hand. "You got here just in time, son," the older man said, his voice shaky. Another minute and he couldn't finish the sentence. Isabel finally found her voice, reaching up to gently touch the cut on his face. "You're hurt," she murmured, the tears finally coming, hot and fast. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Tokyo." Damien took her hands in his gaze so intense it stole her breath. "I couldn't leave you," he confessed. "I got to the airport in New York, and I couldn't get on that plane. I stood there, at the gate, and I realized I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life." In the distance, the wail of approaching sirens grew louder. "I got on the first flight back," he continued, his voice low and urgent. "I landed a few hours ago and came straight here. When you weren't at the hotel, I started driving towards your house. I was a few blocks away when I heard the screaming." With a sob, Isabel threw herself into his arms, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just spun out of control. "Thank you," she whispered into his shirt. "Thank you for coming back." Damien held her tight, his arms a circle of strength and safety around her. "I'm never leaving again," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Not without you." The fluorescent lights of Queen's General Hospital cast a cold, impersonal glare on everything. Isabel sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair in the waiting room, her hands twisted together in her lap. 2 hours had passed since the paramedics had wheeled her father through the emergency room doors. Eddie Jimenez was in police custody, having been hauled away, still unconscious, from the wreckage of her living room. "I brought you some coffee," Damien said, his voice a quiet comfort. He returned from the hospital's bleak cafeteria with 2 paper cups. "It's terrible, but it's hot." She accepted it with a weary smile, noting he had cleaned the blood from his face, though the cut on his eyebrow was now stark against his pale skin. "Thank you," she murmured, "for this and for everything." He sat beside her, the warmth of his body a reassuring presence. His impeccable suit was a ruined mess, his tie gone, and yet, she thought, he had never looked more handsome. "How's your hand?" she asked, nodding toward his bruised knuckles. "It's nothing," he dismissed, flexing his fingers. "Your ex has a surprisingly thick skull." A small, watery laugh escaped her. "I didn't know billionaires knew how to fight." "I box 3 times a week," he explained with a faint smile. "My trainer says it's good for stress relief." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind of silence shared by people who have weathered a storm together and have found refuge on the other side. "Family of Fernando Vance," a nurse called out. Isabel shot to her feet, Damien right behind her. "I'm his daughter," she said, her voice tight with anxiety. "How is he?" The nurse offered a kind, reassuring smile. "He's stable. He has 2 cracked ribs and some significant bruising, but thankfully no serious internal injuries. The doctor is keeping him overnight for observation, just as a precaution." The relief that washed over Isabel was so profound her knees felt weak. "Can we see him?" "Yes, but just for a few minutes. He's been given a sedative for the pain and he'll be asleep soon." Fernando's room was private and quiet, another of Damien's silent interventions, she was sure. Her father lay in the bed looking small and frail amidst the medical equipment, but he managed a weak smile when they entered. My heroine, and her knight in shining, well, a slightly torn suit, he rasped. Isabel gently took his hand. "How are you feeling, Dad?" "Like I got hit by a truck," he joked. "But these painkillers are marvelous. I feel like I'm floating." He turned his gaze to Damien. "Son, I owe you my life, and my daughter's." "You don't owe me anything, sir," Damien replied respectfully. Fernando's eyes, heavy with sedation, moved between the two of them. "You two, you need to talk," he murmured, his voice fading. "Life is too short for fear." His eyes fluttered shut. Back in the hallway, Damien stopped in front of a large window overlooking the city. "Your father's right," he said softly. "We need to talk." He turned from the window to face her, and in his eyes she saw a raw vulnerability she had never seen before. "I came back because I can't live without you, Isabel," he confessed, his voice low but unwavering. "I've spent the last decade building an empire, chasing success, collecting assets. And in a few short weeks you've shown me that all of it is worthless if I have no one to share it with." Tears she hadn't realized she'd been holding back began to stream down her face. "I tried to forget you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I told myself it was for the best that we were from different worlds, but every single morning you were the first thing I thought about." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I don't care what worlds we come from," he said with fierce intensity. "I only care that we're in the same one now. The money, the business, the empire, I'll walk away from it all if I have to." "Don't say that," she said, shaking her head. "I would never ask you to give up who you are." "Look at me," he urged, gently cupping her face in his hands. "You're not asking me to give anything up. Isabel, you are my life now. The only thing I'm absolutely certain of in this world is us." Time seemed to stop. All the walls, all the fears, all the carefully constructed reasons why they couldn't be together crumbled into dust. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't want to run anymore. She met him halfway, her lips finding his. The kiss was soft at first, a question. Then it deepened, becoming an answer, a promise, a homecoming. It was a kiss that sealed every crack in her heart, that silenced every doubt in her mind. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and dizzy, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Isabel Vance," Damien said, the words as natural and essential as breathing. "And I love you, Damien Blackwood," she replied, a joy so pure and overwhelming it felt like flying. Against all logic, against all odds, they held each other in the middle of that sterile hospital corridor, oblivious to the world around them. Outside, the city of New York hummed with its relentless energy, but for them, the entire universe had shrunk to the space of that embrace, to the silent promise of a future they would now face together. 2 days later, Isabel returned to work. Her father was recovering at home, fussed over by a full-time nurse Damien had insisted on hiring. News of the attack and Damien's heroic return had spread through the hotel staff like wildfire. She felt the weight of their curious stares and hushed whispers as she walked to the locker room. "Mr. Monroe wants to see you in his office." "Immediately," Carla informed her, her expression grim. Isabel's stomach tightened. Richard Monroe, the general manager of the Majestic Grand, was a man who valued image and order above all else. She had a very bad feeling about this. With her head held high, she took the elevator to the executive floor. Monroe's office was an intimidating space of dark wood and panoramic city views, designed to make one feel small. He was waiting for her, a tall, impeccably dressed man with an expression of cold disapproval. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice like ice. "Sit down." She did, her back ramrod straight. "I have been made aware of a violent incident at your residence," he began, glancing at a folder on his desk. "An incident involving one of our most valued guests, Mr. Blackwood." "It was a personal matter, sir," Isabel said calmly. "My ex-boyfriend broke in and—" "I am not interested in the sordid details of your personal life," Monroe cut her off. "I am interested in the reputation of this hotel, a reputation built on discretion and professionalism." He leaned forward. "I also have reports of an inappropriate relationship between you and Mr. Blackwood during his stay. Several employees have noted your frequent presence in his suite at all hours." Rage, hot and sharp, flared in Isabel's chest. "That is not true," she protested. "I never—" "The Majestic Grand," Monroe continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "does not tolerate this kind of fraternization between staff and guests. It is unseemly." He opened a drawer and slid an envelope across the desk. "I'm afraid we have to terminate your employment, Miss Vance. Your severance is calculated according to the law." The words hit her like a physical blow. 5 years of dedicated, flawless work, erased by baseless accusations and the manager's petty prejudices. "Mr. Monroe, this is completely unfair," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "I have been a model employee for 5 years." Monroe raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Are you questioning my judgment? Be grateful I am not making the reasons for your dismissal public. That would be far more damaging for your reputation than for mine." That was it. Isabel stood up, her entire body shaking. "You have no right," she began, her voice rising. "I have done nothing wrong and you will not—" A soft knock on the door interrupted her. Monroe's secretary peeked her head in, looking flustered. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Monroe, but there is a gentleman who insists on seeing you. He says it's urgent." "I am in a meeting," Monroe snapped. "Tell him to wait." "But, sir," the secretary stammered, "it's Mr. Blackwood." Monroe's demeanor changed in a heartbeat. The stern mask vanished, replaced by an oily, sycophantic smile. "Well, send him in, of course, immediately." The door swung open, and Damien strode in, his presence immediately commanding the entire room. He was wearing a perfectly tailored dark grey suit, the picture of power and control. His eyes went straight to Isabel, saw her tear-filled eyes and clenched fists, and his expression hardened into granite. "Mr. Blackwood," What a pleasant surprise, Monroe gushed, extending a hand. I was just unjustly firing your best employee, Damien finished, ignoring the outstretched hand. Yes, I heard most of it through the door. The color drained from Monroe's face. Sir, there are hotel policies, he stammered. Miss Vance, Damien interrupted, his voice lethally quiet, is an exceptional woman who does not deserve to be subjected to your slanderous accusations. With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, this is an internal hotel matter. A slow, cold smile spread across Damien's face. That's actually what I came to talk to you about, he said, pulling a thick document from his briefcase and placing it on the desk. As of last week, this hotel is no longer the property of the Mediterranean Group. It was acquired by Blackwood Holdings. The silence in the room was absolute. Monroe stared at the document as if it were a coiled snake. As the new owner, Damien continued, his voice level and cold, my first official act is to terminate your employment, Mr. Monroe. Your corporate vision does not align with the values I intend to instill in this establishment. You have 1 hour to clear out your desk. Defeated and humiliated, Monroe gathered his things and scurried out of the office without another word. Isabel stared at Damien, utterly speechless. You bought the hotel? She finally managed to ask. For me. He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. Not entirely, he said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. It was a sound financial investment, but I will admit, I may have expedited the closing when I found out how they were treating their staff. A laugh mixed with tears of relief bubbled up from her chest. You're insane, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. Insanely in love with you, he replied, and then he kissed her, right there in the office of the hotel he had just bought, erasing the last of the bitterness and fear and replacing it with the sweet, undeniable taste of victory. 6 months later, Isabel stood on the balcony of a suite at the Royal Monceau in Paris, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and rose. The Eiffel Tower stood against the vibrant backdrop, a perfect silhouette, just like in the postcards she used to dream about. The last 6 months had been a whirlwind of impossible beauty. After her father had fully recovered, Damien had swept her away on a journey across the globe. They had walked the ancient streets of Rome, glided through the canals of Venice, and gotten lost in the vibrant energy of Tokyo. But it was the small, quiet moments that she cherished most, sharing breakfast in bed, debating the ending of a novel until dawn, and simply holding his hand while they explored a new city. Ready for dinner? Damien's voice asked as he wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. She leaned back into him, a feeling of pure contentment washing over her. It still felt unreal at times, as if she might wake up any moment to the sound of her alarm clock in her small bedroom in Queens. They dined at Le Jules Verne, inside the Eiffel Tower itself. After dessert, Damien led her up to the observation deck, under a canopy of Parisian stars with the city of lights spread out at their feet like a carpet of scattered diamonds. He took both of her hands in his. 7 months ago, he said, his voice soft and full of emotion, I walked into my hotel room and found a woman who would turn my entire world upside down. A woman who taught me that true wealth has nothing to do with a bank account and everything to do with the heart. Isabel's own heart was beating so fast she was sure the entire city could hear it. Then he knelt down on one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Isabel Vance, he said, his eyes shining with love. Would you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife? He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant solitaire diamond, a ring so perfectly her, it was as if he had looked directly into her soul. Yes, she whispered, tears of pure happiness streaming down her cheeks. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and as he rose to kiss her, a smattering of applause broke out from the other tourists on the deck. There, high above Paris, the maid and the billionaire sealed a promise that had defied all odds, a promise born in a chance encounter, forged in adversity, and destined to last a lifetime. A fairy tale ending for a story that was just beginning.